For Ruang Didik Season 1, we will be discussing about education with an intersectional outlook and interdisciplinary perspective. Education is a sector that is interconnected with other aspects of a nation or society, such as its governance system or regional development. So, for this season, let's try to unpack how all of these are interconnected so that we can address the current challenges of our education system. For this episode, we have Cikgu Zell and Ariff Putera, a research officer from Institute Development Studies Sabah. He'll be chatting about education and federalism and how they actually play out in a Malaysian context.
Okay, hello Adi.
Hi, hello.
Yeah, all right. So today's conversation will be about education and federalism in the Malaysian context. But firstly, I think there will be a lot of teachers who will be listening to this, and they would want to know what actually is federalism. Like in lay people terms, could you explain to us what is federalism?
Oh, okay. So I'll just keep it simple. So federalism is basically how a country would organize itself. So federalism is where you have one central government and then you have separate state governments, which governs a certain area, which we call a state. So a general example that you could use is the United States of America. They have within each of the states, they have their own state government, and they have some kinds of freedoms of how they go about with their own legislative, their own customary judiciary as well. So the whole point of federalism is that you're supposed to give certain territories a certain level of autonomy and control over how they govern themselves. So in Malaysia, we have about all the main states, and then each of these states has its own state government, which is called Dewan Undangan Negeri. So yeah, basically that's in a nutshell. Federalism is a way that you have a central government and you have state governments that helps oversee each of the operations so that it gives more of a decentralized approach.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that explanation. In terms of education in Malaysia, I think it's very obvious that for education in Malaysia, in terms of federalism, it's highly centralized, right? So because each state in Malaysia, they don't have full control of for example, like the syllabus and whatnot. So it's always the central government that would be planning, for example, the curriculum, the funding, and all that. So what do you think of the pros and cons of this? Okay, let's go with the pros first. I mean, generally, what are the pros of federalism in your view?
For me, I think it's a great way to organize a country because each state that we have has its own unique characteristics. Not every state is the same. Let's take Sabah and Sarawak, for example. We have sort of an ethnic makeup here and demographic that's completely different from, let's say, what you have the states in Semenanjung. We don't just have Malay, Chinese, or Indian here. We have a lot of ethnic and sub-ethnic groups here. So the point of federalism is to make sure that each of these states are properly represented and properly brought forth when it comes to governance itself. So let's say you would have Sabah, right? It's not, like I said, it's not just a demographic makeup, which how we would look at the whole Malaysian narrative, which is just these three main races. No, we have to. The point of federalism here, I think the pro is that each state can represent itself. It can articulate what it really needs on the national level to make sure that it gets the aspirations and the wishes of its own people are also fulfilled. That's why we would have the people would complain saying that Sabah and Sarawak doesn't have enough seats when it comes to the Dewan Rakyat. So I think a pro here for me is that, yeah, it gives more people from different kinds of backgrounds more chances to voice out. Because imagine if we don't really have a state government, right? So we would have 20 plus seats in Sabah. How is 20 people going to represent all of Sabah and all of its ethnic groups and all its indigenous groups? So yeah, at least the state government allows 79 people to do that as well.
Okay, how about the cons? What do you feel are the cons of federalism?
I think for me, a situation where federalism will be difficult is how it would be managed, because when federalism, we look at autonomy as the way that federalism is structured. If you have too much autonomy for a certain state, sometimes that doesn't align with the national interest. So let's say one state can do something that the whole national narrative doesn't really approve of. For example, when we look at the America, each state has its. I think now they're going through that whole struggle of trying to find a way to compromise on things like such as LGBT rights, or things such as defunding the police. So for each state, yeah, that's fine, because each state is able to choose how the way it wants to be governed. So if, let's say, California wants to decriminalize certain things, but then again, it may not go in the same way as the national interest wants to go. And considering how, for some states, they could be the economic powerhouses for the entire nation. So there's that interest at play here, is that sometimes the state interest does not align with the central interest, the central government. So when you have that, you would have a situation where it's very unequal. There's inequality of power when it between state and federal, or between federal and state. So there's those inequalities that federalism, it can easily appear in federalism as well.
Oh, okay. So you just now you mentioned about national interest. Like let's go back to like how education is tied into all of this. I mean, especially in the Malaysian context, whereby our education system is highly centralized. So in terms of national interest, you know how our textbooks, they or the curriculum, they are more or less the same. Like every state, we learn the same thing. So for example, like history, we learn the same thing, and then yeah. So I guess like in terms of education, the pros of having a highly centralized education system, I guess there's a unified knowledge. Yeah, unified knowledge whereby everyone learns the same curriculum or having the same syllabus, which also leads to like a relatableness at a national level. So there is a sense of unity in that way. Yeah, and also it's because the national syllabus that we have, one of the aims is to produce students who have a national identity, not just state specific identity, but also like Malaysian identity. Yeah, so I guess it can, you mentioned about national interest, so that reminded me of our curriculum. We learn more or less the same thing, from primary until secondary. And then, like for example, the cons, right? The cons of having a highly centralized education system. You know how West Malaysia and East Malaysia, they are culturally distinct. Very different in terms of ethnicity and racial makeup. So you can't cater to local knowledge. Like, for example, local knowledge, as in, and I think one of the most famous things that have been mentioned is our history books. Yeah, so it has been said that our history books is we don't really cater to the East Malaysian perspective. Yeah, that's one of the criticism. And also, so this leads to like Sabahans, they don't know a lot about their own history, but we learn about our national history instead, which is not wrong, but how there needs to be a balance. We can learn about national history, but at the same time, you also want to learn about our state specific history. But I know it will be a problem in terms of developing the textbooks and also developing the curriculum. Sometimes there is no capacity in doing that. I mean, there are people behind doing the curriculum and all that. I believe it's because of capacity as well. They lack capacity. That's why I think we only have what we have now. Yeah, in terms of history textbooks at least. So I guess there should be an understanding about capacity as well. But yeah, at the same time, one of the results will be that like for us Sabahans, we won't know a lot about our own history. For example, that is one of the consequences, I think. And also, one of the cons is indigenous language preservation. or lack thereof. Like for example, yesterday I read one article from the Star, and also Free Malaysia Today also picked that up. It says here the title is "Four Tribal Languages Are Now Extinct in Sarawak," say linguist experts. This was released yesterday, yeah. So I think this is due to because we have a highly centralized education system, and you know how when we learn language, it will always be through the education system. That's how we learn, Malay and English. But I will relate this to Sabah as well, like because we want to follow, we want a national identity. That means we want to speak in Malay. I mean, it's not wrong, but one of the, it's like when we need to learn the language, the Malay language as our national language, then there was a setback for the indigenous language, the indigenous languages in Sabah or
You
Sarawak.
mean exposure ke? Exposure to your local languages. Schools we only learn Malay, we only learn English kan. So where do we don't really get the exposure kan for like our local languages. Like for me, like I'm Pak Dusun and I've never been exposed to any kind of unless I go back to the kampung lah, then I would hear Dusun. But when you go to school, it's almost unheard of. You can never hear that kan.
Yeah, exactly. So there's that, and yeah, that is one of the consequences of having I guess, highly centralized education system. In terms of because of we want to have a national identity, but the indigenous languages of Sabah and Sarawak they were being sacrificed in a way. Yeah. So what else? Do you have anything else that you might know, like you want to share in terms of your experience in school, maybe? Yeah.
Well, not necessarily my experience in school, but like how we came to this juncture lah, with how the whole idea of centralized education lah. I mean, it was, I know for a fact that it was set up when Malaya first was founded lah. That the founding fathers of Malaya needed to find a way to standardize education. And then if you wanted to learn English, usually even back then, you would go to a mission school, like all the La Salle boys and all the church schools and all that. That's where you would go to learn English. And then later it was nationalized. So in a way, all these church schools eventually became Malayanized in a way. Then we had, like, I'm talking about national identity here, is that because there's this progression here that's not exactly linear. You would have like just like these small ironies coming in and over, like how our education history works is that then vernacular schools also is another issue that the whole education system, like politically speaking, is like the struggle to make sure that vernacular schools are remain is a thing, should remain a thing and shouldn't be abolished in favor for sekolah kebangsaan and national curriculum. So when it comes to like national identity here, when it comes to education, you can even see like there's so many different quirkiness, but there's a bit of quirks here and there that when it comes to ironing out a standardized, centralized education, we still have that issue. We don't really know how we haven't. For me, I don't think we've really figured out what is it that we want to put in our education system, or like the tools that we have, the subjects, how it's taught. It doesn't feel like it's entirely focused. Like I for me, when I was in school, right, I wasn't really the most attentive student because I think partially also one of it was laziness. That was one of it. But another one reason is that I don't feel an end to it. Like I don't see the reason to get to the end. It's just like a day in, day out kind of thing where you just go in, you study, you memorize. To what end really, other than just getting a good job or good university again? So what really is I mean, I know the point of education is to prepare you for that, but I didn't feel it when I was in school, and a lot of people I know that go to different kinds of schools also have that kind of apathy towards education. Like, what is the purpose that we have schools? Is it just to uplift students, or is it to teach them something, or to prepare them for something, or to I don't know, mold them to become I don't know, productive members of society? I know this gets thrown a lot, that the Asian education systems is always about memorizing and producing robots that can just regurgitate everything. rather than thinking critically. So I know that's always a point of contention in schools, is that there's not much emphasis on critical thinking. So for me, that's how I would, when we look into the education system itself, it's very quirky in a way. There's a lot of quirks here and there, and we don't think we know how to go about evolving sort of this, what to say, education system.
Yeah, well, as a teacher myself, I need to take that into account, your opinion, so that my students won't have that kind of feeling, when
They don't end up like me, just apathetic.
yeah,
Jadi malas.
yeah, like you said earlier, like our schools, you did not feel like you were taught about critical thinking, right? So, I mean, you were at school like how many years ago? Like it was, you were under the KBSM syllabus. Now it's the KSSM syllabus, so it's a bit different. So, but yeah, what you said just now, I think I need to keep in mind that I don't want you to have those kinds of students lah, like to have that kind of opinion. So that means it's not, because sometimes we tend to look at, okay, these students are lazy. Okay, it's not my fault. I already coming to the class and then I already teach them, but they are the ones who won't listen. But for me, I view it as I have to do something so that they will think critically and they will enjoy learning. Yeah. So what you said, your experience, I hope my students won't experience that. Yeah. And then you mentioned about like, okay, there was this one book that I read. Actually, in terms of, let's go back to talking about indigenous language education. It's like before Sabah, before Malaysia was formed. Okay, it was during the British time, and in schools, so the students, they actually learned Kadazan. This was in the 50s, 40s, 50s. Yeah, before Malaysia was formed, and yeah, so it was before all of this. Like it was before Malaysia's highly centralized education system came into the scene. So it was, I'm not sure how. I think it was under the British administration at that time, but I guess in this sense, the British gave them. The British understood the needs of the community at that time. So that was why that was why Kadazan was being taught in schools in a few districts, in Sabah, and that was in the 50s. Yeah, so it was alive and well. Kadazan or Dusun was alive and well in schools during the British government at that time. And then, when Malaysia formed, and then we need to have a national identity, national language, and so having this kind of highly centralized education system, all of the students would need to, main focus would be Malay, and second focus would be English because of globalization. But yeah, I think that is one of the consequences of having this kind of highly centralized education system. I think in my head is, of course, it's just the indigenous language part, because I'm one of the case study lah. As in like I can speak basic Kadazan, but I cannot really speak fluently like my elders. I wish I could, but I couldn't. And yeah, so I'm that case study. Recently, I read in Pakatan Harapan's manifesto. They wanted to. This was before the election. There were early talks of wanting to decentralize the education system. But when I read the manifesto, it says to put it in the concurrent list instead of the federal list. That means, for our listeners out there, this means concurrent list means the federal and the state government will basically work together in terms of education, and not only the federal. So the state also has some form of power, not only the federal. So that was one of the things stated in the manifesto. All right. So Adi, what do you think about this? Decentralizing it to the concurrent list instead of the state list.
I think it's all well and good. At least we can have some say in how we want our education to be structured. But for me, again, the main thing for me is what kind of education system do we want to see exactly? Is because, like I mentioned, like how when I was studying, the whole point of education is quite aimless. Lah. The way it's structured, the way it's presented, the way it's taught, it seems very. I don't know where am I going with this. And there's no, how do you say, a reason for it really. And I know, I think the emphasis on education here is to make you a productive member for not just society only, but industry lah, to be like basically like human capital, and reducing people and students and graduates into just a quantity of how they can contribute to the economy. But what, there's other contributions as well. There's also contribution to things like arts and culture, and the humanities basically. And it doesn't seem to be structured in that sort of way lah, for me. I know when primary school we have things like social sciences. I really enjoyed that. It was one of my favorite subjects. And to an extent I did enjoy sejarah lah, but aside from the ideological bend that it has. Okay, that's what I'm trying to say, is that the education doesn't seem to have a concrete ideology on how to produce quality graduates. Like if we look at when I went to the UK, right, I noticed that the education there is centered around like tapping into a strong sense of culture, a strong sense of identity that they have. So they would read all these kinds of amazing books there, and over here it doesn't really have. It lacks that sort of that element there. So it comes to the tools that we have when we teach Sabahan students, if we want to go through this whole decentralized route. It's like, what kind of Sabahan young graduates do we want to make? Is it just people who are going to end up being workers, or do you want how can we inculcate them to be more than just workers or members of industry, or the whole, being part of the whole machine of capital? How can we make them embrace that sense of like I said, critical thinking, basically? How do we want that, or do we want something that's just so we can further economic interests for the state? So if that's the case, then education can be centered more around trade schools and technical vocations. And then if you want it to be something more art that focuses on the arts, then you have like performing arts schools, and you give performing arts as more emphasis in as subjects, or those kinds of things. So what kind of system is the thing here? And I think if proper planning, if we don't plan it properly, then there's the addition to the concurrent list for education. It's going to be a waste unless the people that are in charge knows what kind of graduates Sabah would like. Like I know in Sarawak they're making small progress when they maintain that English is will remain the working language, is even the language used in is more openly used in the Legislative Assembly. So they want to position that British kind of legacy there, and also to make Sarawak a very global port of call for investors and all kinds of international groups and all that, to be part of the globalized community. For Sabah, what do we want? So it goes back to this whole question of what do we see ourselves? What kind of people do we want? And that will reflect heavily on how we craft our systems of education. So that's really me. Like there needs to be a goal, objective, or probably even an ideological bend to trying to change our education system to fit us better.
So when it comes to decentralization, our leaders have been talking about this, especially for Sabah and Sarakian leaders. So for me it was kind of vague in terms of what kind of aspect do you want to decentralize. That was the thing in my head. Was it teacher recruitment, or was it the curriculum, or is it the funding? So when I read the manifesto, it mentioned about having full control of fixing not full control, but maybe partial control of fixing dilapidated schools, and also ethnic languages, the teaching of ethnic languages. So I guess when they want to decentralize, they want to move it to the concurrent list. I guess they have what they have in mind is because let's talk about Sabah. Sabah has the issue is always dilapidated schools. When it comes to Sabah and perhaps Sarawak as well. So I guess that is why they put that in the manifesto, or maybe they're one of the efforts to decentralize education, and also to create a quality education. Because if you want a quality education, that means you need to have quality facilities, and in this case, it's the school. And then secondly, they mentioned about ethnic languages. So because like I mentioned before, West Malaysia, East Malaysia, we are culturally distinct. So this is true to the spirit of federalism, I guess, because they want to cater to the unique culture of Sabah and Sarawak, and so that's why they have this kind of plan in the manifesto. So it says ensuring that the teaching and learning of ethnic languages such as Kadazan Dusun, Bajau, Murut, Iban, and others are expanded consistently every year. Yeah. So even with this statement, it's still kind of vague in terms of which aspect does the state want to have control over in terms of ethnic languages? Is it teacher recruitment or the curriculum? Is it funding for the ethnic language programs? So for me, it's still vague at this point. And of course, when we talk about decentralization, I read one book on U.S. education. For the U.S., it's the opposite. U.S. education system is highly decentralized, whereby states have full say of what they want, what they want the teachers to teach. Even in terms of curriculum and the funding, it all goes down to the state level. So there are two things that we need to bear in mind here when we talk about decentralizing education from the federal level to the state level, or at least mix, which is license and capacity. Yeah, license, of course, through this manifesto, and also if it were to be debated, in parliament, tabled, and then passed, when it goes through that policy making process, they will. License is given. Yeah, license is given. But then again, we have to think about the capacity. Capacity, as in, when states have partial control of the education system, then in terms of capacity, we need to think about financial resources, the bureaucratic structures. I think that there will be a lot of restructuring. In terms of right now we have JPN, Jabatan Pendidikan Negeri, the State Education Department. So I guess that will be restructured as well. And then like governmental regulatory agencies, and then expertise of government employees or public servants. So like all of these things, some of them needs not training, and then workshop, so that these people, in terms of capacity, so that this kind of decentralization process can be effective. Because right now, all I see is, of course, there is license. It will be given license. Hopefully, but how about capacity? That's my concern. So in terms of this, we need to figure this out first. We need to figure out how do we let these people know what to do. Tell them that, we don't have to tell them, like, we train them, and then in the long run, they know what to do in the end, especially on, let's focus on dilapidated schools and also ethnic languages. We start a conversation about this because in the media, maybe our leaders, they did not touch on it So yeah, what do you think? These two factors.
I remember when former Education Minister Mazli Malik, when he came to, and he's still minister lah, he came to Sabah. He had this whole town hall session in UMS at the Vice Chancellor's building, and he was just surprised and astonished to see how a lot of schools in Sabah, especially in rural areas, looks as if they were frozen in time. It's almost as if it was still stuck in the 60s or the 70s. And I was like, yeah, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? We've been facing this kind of thing every day in and day out. And for a federal minister, to only realize that to be the case now. So it's like, yeah, we don't have the capacity. Like, we cannot blame as well, like how some of the how education works here in Sabah is because, like, you look at students, they have to cross a broken, dilapidated bridge to get to school, and then the school itself has blackouts, lack of internet access. So if you want to do like some kind of research on, do your own research or do your own study online, or during COVID, it just put it on full display how limited or how inhibited the education delivery of education itself is here. And I don't, and then it comes to the idea of like, okay, we want to decentralize it. Does that also like, do we would like this, like, can we see things like other supporting infrastructure as well? Because when it comes to a lot of the infrastructure for students to get there so that they can enjoy the education, like, yeah, you can make the schools the best, you can make the curriculum the best, but the other supporting infrastructure like the roads, the bridges, or means of to get to the schools, if that's lacking also, then that's just going to be a moot point, isn't it? Like, and that comes to the idea of public works, which a lot of it like is still handled by a federal ministry. Like, of course we have GKR here, but we also have to refer to KPLB, which is a federal position. So there's that whole, like, education is not just doesn't just start and end with education itself. There's a lot of other supporting infrastructure or other aspects as well that you need to strengthen if you want it to be effective. Like, let's say tertiary education, like we put a lot of stock in sending our kids to university so that they can get a degree or they can get a master's and all that. But when it comes to the cost to bear for them to do it, like sending like a child to university is not a cheap thing. It's very expensive, and then that's why we have things like loans as well, educational loans, which I think at this point is almost difficult for a graduate to even service or to even pay back. Like, you want to blame young people for not saving enough money to pay back the student loans. It's like, look at the state that we're currently living in. So it's connected to so many other things as well that makes education itself very difficult to handle. And if you're going to decentralize education, then we also have to look at cooperating on other fronts as well. Like for instance, like Anwar Ibrahim, they announced that if the Anwar administration announced that projects up to 50 million ringgit does not need to be cleared through the finance ministry and federal. They can just proceed without that much federal oversight. So, it's these kinds of small little things as well that empowers the state not just to give better education, but to deliver better education. So, yeah, I mean, you yourself, I think you have better experience with this. Like, how much like support, not just like support does the State Department for Education provide, or this is still like beholden to a lot of like, you have to go through a lot of the bureaucracy and all that. And I kind of want to know as well, like, who are the people, like, what kind of people are in charge here? Like, is it are there educators or like civil servants with an educational background, or is it just like regular civil servants? Because we need the right people to make sure that the right things are said and the right things are passed. So I think I'll just ask you the question, like, do we have necessarily the best people that can handle all of these things?
Well, basically, they are, from what I know, they are civil servants who have education background, and many of them are former teachers. Yeah, they used to work in schools, but now they are working as high-ranking officials at JPN. All right, so I'm not. I mean, all of them. I believe they are working towards, at their best capacity, on how to improve education in the state level. Yeah, that's what I believe. But of course, like you mentioned just now, there are other things that are the factors that might hinder quality education. These are like the invisible, I call them the invisible factors, like we don't really see it directly because all we see is like, okay, whenever there's a problem in education, then you will focus it on KPN or GPN. Whereas these things, they are interrelated, they are intersectional, like you mentioned just now, like the roads, and then there are a lot of things, and there are other things that you mentioned earlier also. And I would also like to mention that actually I'm looking at the data from the Department of Statistics Malaysia, and there's this three kind of indicators: incidence of poverty, access to electricity, and access to piped water at home. There are also basic necessities that we need to address first, like because they are basic necessities, and these basic necessities, it will give, for example, the students like water, for example, basically like drinking water. You need your brain needs water, right? Okay, and then also you need to be clean when you go to the school so that you won't feel uncomfortable, so that you will, when you learn in school, you will feel fresh, basically. Yeah, that's the basic thing. And then also like electricity. Electricity, access to electricity in Sabah is the lowest one, and then based on the data. And also I because I was in a rural school, I taught at a rural school for 6 years, and yeah, there were a lot of incidents where power was cut off. So it was difficult for even the teachers to do some work, and then the students to study. I remember this one time, um, it was it was during the exam season, okay, and the students, they need to study. They were at the hostel. I was the warden, so there was no electricity. So the students were, they were struggling. They were thinking, okay, teacher, how are we actually going to study when there's no electricity? They were struggling. So that actually affects their learning performance as well, So these are the things that we don't really see, in terms of student performance, learning, quality education, all of these things, the basic things like access to electricity, pipe water, and all that. And also, like you mentioned, like transportation, yeah, those are also one of a few of the factors that can affect quality education that most people don't really talk about, maybe because they've never experienced it. They feel like it's kind of isolated from them. Even teachers, not because teachers, we are not a monolith. We are scattered around the nation, in different demographics. Some in poor, some in rural areas, some are in the urban. So those who are in the urban, they won't be able to understand what the rural teachers are experiencing. Sometimes when I speak to my colleagues, I already transferred to a suburban school. When I talk to them about my experience in rural areas, sometimes I feel, I do want to talk about my experience, but I have accepted the fact that they will not be able to imagine what I went through. Yeah, what I saw, what my students went through as well.
Jeez,
So
like that's so how do you actually like handle the students though? Like when they tell you like there's no water, there's no electricity, like what goes through your head when they come to you asking you that? Like and I know it's like there's nothing we really can do. Like if I was in your position, like I'd be freaking out. Like what do I say to these kids to make sure they don't feel I don't know.
yeah. So what I did was, within my own capacity, because I was the warden as well, so I have to take care of them. The school, from my own capacity, and also within the school's capacity, we provided lamps, like the battery powered lamps. Yeah. So we provided the students with that, but that was not enough. It was not as bright as, the lamps that we're using now. So it will also affect them, in terms of the eyesight, yeah, it will have long-term consequences. So that is not good as well. It's not as bright. But thankfully, my school at that time, we did something lah. We had to solve this kind of problem. We already anticipated that, okay, genset rosak. Those kinds of things. Those are normal things that we always expect to happen in the rural area, especially during my previous school. And also, I mean, it's good lah that all of us teachers, we already anticipated those kind of things, so we prepared plans. But at the same time, until when? Until when do we want to live like this? Yeah, macam tu lah. Those kinds of feelings, they tend to pop out lah, But I mean, what we can do is just do what we can within our own capacity lah, as a teacher and then also as a school leader lah. Yeah, that's one of my experience lah.
Yeah, I think I read some in the budget as well that they're allocating quite a substantial amount of money just to renovate and repair like the schools and stuff. But I think it was about, I can't remember the figure of the like several hundred million. So I hope, really, I honestly hope to God that somehow is translated, like it distributes properly for the schools in Sabah here. I mean, like basic necessities and all that. It's like I remember like blackout in school. 2 hours is already like horrible for me, and I can't imagine like not having proper drinking water or like that being a whole day or even a week-long thing. Yeah, it's a very stressful like environment for like young people who's still developing to grow up, isn't it? Like how long in like, but that's what I want to try to get back is that like for you, if let's say you could have a say, right? What do you think is a good stopgap measure, like a short-term measure that can be done just to make sure that these things aren't like these things don't become a common occurrence? Like I know some schools, they like some NGOs, they help the schools saying by setting up like solar panels so that it's solar powered, or like it comes, I don't know, like what other methods that can be done just as a short-term measure, while I don't know, the top people in Putera solves out the longer term goals and strategies.
Oh yeah, just now I mentioned about genset. It was not genset. The school is solar powered, but sometimes the solar power, it got busted. Like sometimes there will be problems with with the solar. So that was when they had to study in the dark, in dim light. Sometimes of course, it's not. Back then, a common occurrence lah. It was a common occurrence, but it was kind of stressful. But I mean, it was like first few years when I was there, it was a common occurrence whereby there was no electricity. Electricity got cut off because of the solar power. And then after that, during my 5th or 6th year, it was okay lah, but still, those things happen. But imagine, how about other rural schools that don't have solar power at all, and also solar power that do not get maintained. Solar powers that don't get maintained by the people lah, and then you have to wait because of the journey. Takes a very long time for me because it was to go there you have to go through by boat 2 hours and 30 minutes boat ride lah, and then sometimes if the weather is not good, and then it can be dangerous in the sea, so people, they don't want to risk their lives going into the school location lah, so we have to wait for like a few days, sometimes a week without electricity. Yeah, that happened. I mean, it didn't happen to me, but it happened before at that school. I mean, because this is based on a few of the teachers there in the stories lah. Yeah. So, I guess solar power is okay, but then you need the maintenance part. It needs to be consistent, and then and contract. And that involves contract as well. The maintenance part, ada kontrak. Yeah, that's the one of the solutions lah.
Yeah, I think when it comes to delivery systems, that's like you said, it's an invisible thing. Like you have to consider like delivery of infrastructure, delivery of to make sure that the schools are running at the best maximum potential it can be. Um, but I don't know how long it's going to be till we reach that stage, and I do hope it comes soon and all that. And like I remember I was going through this is outside like primary and secondary education. Like when I was reading something about tertiary education, um, like we have about like also, like the quality of graduates from universities here, because like I did my master's here in the UMS here, and so I did kind of have like can see like some students who not necessarily my course, but overall in general the university itself, how it's run and the way it's organized, like the quality is like it seems like to me, right, that the university tradition really that inculcates like excellence and all that. I feel like that seems to be stunted in a way, and I noticed that I like to correlate this as well to the fact that a lot of I don't know if it's the same in primary or secondary schools, but I do know like in universities, a lot of let's say appointments into top positions like chancellor and all that can be politically motivated. And if you're a willing participant as a political agent, you get rewarded. You get put as a chancellor or a vice chancellor, or these the idea, the whole political interference, I feel is also an issue when it comes to tackling education. And it might not necessarily be like a state thing, but a federal thing as well, because it's the central government that decides how our curriculums are structured, what things are considered sensitive, things you shouldn't say, or things you shouldn't really do, because it upsets the whole status quo. Like that whole incident within, I think it was University Malaya, that one kid doing a very tasteless gesture, and then he, was rejected completely from his from being accepted, like receiving his degree, like those kinds of things. Like, do you feel like in a way a lot of the education system is also motivated and like, animated by political considerations? Like, do you think politics also plays a huge part in how our education is structured, or how our education is planned out? Really, like in your perspective, like do you see that playing out in like your day to day, with in the schools, though?
Well, I've always reminded myself that, and also I've said this before to other people, that education is not ideology free. Yeah, education is not ideology free. So there is inherently in there, you know. So if there is political interference, but we may not see it, I mean, it's kind of, it can be invisible because we are too busy with our lives. For me as a teacher, most people think, okay, education is neutral. That it should be. They always say that politics should not interfere education. But what I can say is, there's always gonna be some kind of political, not interference, but it's political in a way, but people don't see that. It will always be political in terms of, because when it comes to administering education, you involve, the education minister, and the education minister is part of a political party, and also when people say that an education minister should not be a politician, which I think is, in the long term, will be problematic, because why we have a politician, okay, in the, holding the ministerial post, is because we need check and balance. Yeah. So people always prefer, okay, it should be a technocrat, it should be an academician becoming the education minister. It should be a teacher. It should be a school principal, a former school principal, becoming the education minister. yeah, ideally, I mean, that sounds nice because, the person will have like, I mean, basically will have a background knowledge in education and whatnot in teaching, and they know the in and outs of um, education. But actually, if we remove education minister, I mean, a politician from the education minister post, then where's the check and balance? We need check and balance. That's why a politician is there. Uh, yeah, I mean, I think people they get sick and tired of politicians. That's why, and also they get sick and tired of education being politicized. That's why many people are suggesting that uh, there are, there should be a politician up there. It should be a former teacher, former school principal, former academician, those sort of things. But I think in the long run it will be very bad. It will have harmful consequences to our education administration in general as a whole, at a national level even, or even the state level. Yeah. So I think politics will always be in there, but it doesn't have to be, decision making. Politics involves decision making, and all of this, like from top to bottom, it all involves decision making. And when it involves decision making, it will be somewhat political. But how? But is it? Are those kind of decisions are based on personal interest, or based on the interest of everyone, the whole nation, for the students, for the teachers? Yeah, those kinds of things that we need to consider. I mean, it has to be more nuanced lah. Yeah. So that's what I think. It
Yeah,
doesn't
so
have to be toxic, I mean, politics will always be in there. You can't run away from it. Yeah.
so I guess like at the end of the day, it really is like what kind of education system do we really want to see? Because so far we've been strung along by it seems to be the same um, system for the past 40, 50, 60 years. And what's the point of using? And for a lot of people, they say that, or you need to change. The system is broken because it only produces subpar graduates, or that that our graduates cannot compete with the likes of other countries, like example Singapore, or Japan, or things like that, places like that. So it's like we sort of still experiment. I feel like we're still experimenting, but at the same time we're not exactly experimenting with better or new approaches when it comes to education. Like education at the end of the day should be about, for me, is that you're trying to empower the students to be more than just themselves, like more than what they are, break through all these kinds of sensitivities, and be not just equipped for the real world, but also be equipped to face like certain challenges that they'll come across. Like, of course, when we finish school, right, we're thrown out into the world, and most of the time we're not, like, especially people my age, a lot of us were not really prepared for that. We weren't prepared with like how harsh really the world can be. So in a way, it's like like young people, like it's kind of like molding, sculpting out of stone. You cannot expect to make a sculpture with like a butter knife or a mallet. You need like specific tools for it. And to me, like I feel like a lot of it is not adequate. But since your experience as a teacher, like, do you feel like more should be done when it comes to like the students itself? Like more should be done in terms of how you teach the students, or how to approach them? Because but then again, I imagine it'll be difficult as well, because like each class, like how many students? Like I know some schools they have like 50 students per class. In some other schools like 20 students per class. So like that transmission of knowledge, that transmission of skills and all that, like what do you think can be improved though from there? Because like for me, the whole like question I'm asking is like, yeah, we can decentralize everything, but what do we want to see at the end of the day? What kind of education system do we want to see? What kind of curriculum or approaches do we want to see?
Okay, for me, as a teacher, from the perspective of a teacher, For me, we need more higher teacher capital. That means in terms of training, professional judgment, resources, and time, so that we can like fully implement all of the things that we learn, and also the things that we are trained to do for our students. Yeah, and we I guess in terms of, and then we go back to decentralization. I mean, there's this talk about decentralizing education, and that will equate to uh, quality education. But I guess we need to bear in mind that decentralization does not necessarily equate to, quality teachers or quality education system, because let's look at uh, US. The US is having a lot of problems in terms of the teachers. They're not being paid enough, and then there's a lot of paperwork. I mean, like it's kind of funny because for Malaysia we are highly centralized, but in US they are highly decentralized. But then we are facing the same set of problems. One of them is paperwork, too much paperwork. And of course, I know the current administration, they want to reduce the teacher burden. Yeah, but that is one of the things that I find quite very quite. I mean, it's good lah for us teachers. But then again, how about teacher capital? That means to increase the quality of teachers, because most of the time teachers, they, I mean, not all, some that I see, okay, they just go into the school, they do the bare minimum and teach. But then again, how about teaching is, I mean, you have to teach with a lot of diverse styles and diverse pedagogies, not just exam oriented or just pen and paper basic stuff. Gotta learn how to explore, and also to increase your pedagogical knowledge. So that's why I talk about teacher capital in terms of their training, the professional judgment, and then of course the resources as in like funding for teachers to purchase teaching materials, and then as well as time as in we don't want to do a lot of clerical work. Some of the clerical work are redundant and we don't need to do it. I mean, there are other clerical work like key in marks for students. Those things are needed, but there are other clerical work that they are not necessary. I mean, it's not necessarily, and they should not be done by teachers. Yeah, those types of clerical work. And then, yeah, that is when you talk about time as in time to plan, time to create your teaching materials, and so time to think about what are the interventions that you need to do for your students. Because there will be in one class there will be different level of students. How do you want to solve? How do you want to address this student A's learning problems? How do you want to address student B's learning problem, for example? Yeah, those types of things that we need to think about. Yeah, so going back to decentralization again, I think it is not it's not the ultimate solution for quality education overall. It's just one of the ways, I guess. But then again, the delivery, and then the delivery of services, the systems, they need to be efficient. If it's not efficient, then it will be the same. Like they say they want to, for dilapidated schools, they want both federal and state to work together for this one. But if the delivery sucks, and the people behind it are less efficient, then you still have the dilapidated schools. So it's the same. So yeah, in terms of like what you said, delivery as well. Yeah.
Yeah, speaking back on decentralization, like, yeah, when it comes to like the overseeing body for here is Jabatan Pendidikan Negeri, and does decentralization, does it come with just more powers, or what? Is that the specifics are very shifty? Like we don't really know exactly what's gonna happen when it comes to that. Like, does it mean that we're gonna get a ministry of education here? Because Sarawak, I don't think Sarawak has its own, and they're quite decentralized relative to Sabah. But when it comes to, it does sound exciting to say like, oh, we could have Minister of Education just for Sabah and education, and that sounds great and all. Then, but I don't see that as becoming a something that in the short term we could see materializing. I think this will be under JPNS itself that will be one that overseeing the delivery of education. So that comes to like, I know if let's say when you think about decentralizing education, we like to think that we like to think it as, okay, that means we can craft a new curriculum that is localized, that is Sabahan in flavor, that is that takes into account the Sabahan reality. So, but then again, even when it comes to that, what can we, because Sabah is quite ethnically diverse, and you mentioned that Kadazan was part of a curriculum under the British. Like, okay, what would you like to see though? Like your own aspirations when it comes to a decentralized education, aside from distribution and delivery, like the content itself. Like you mentioned a bit here and there, like how like things that like equipping capacity building, equipping teachers to be more diverse and more varied in their approaches to studies. But like the the core itself, like the subjects itself, like what do you think would be great? Like for me, of course, history on Sabah itself, like Sabahan history, like how did we get here, or where did it come from, or how what are the like historical events that are very important and that should be emphasized for us. Other things I would like to see is more emphasis on local languages, stuff like that, because at the end of the day, it's like how do we prepare the next generation to become, you know, the well-informed and strong population.
I guess we have the same view or the same hopes for when if our education system is decentralized. That is to have a more you know history that is we can focus on Sabah. Like we can learn about national history and also Sabah's history. Yeah, so we need to have a balance of that. And also you talked about local languages. Yeah, that is also one of the things that I want to see more in Sabah if the decentralization is materialized lah in the future. So yeah, I guess those are the two things. I mean, in terms of subjects. I mean, in terms of curriculum, decentralization is. Um, I'm not sure if it can be done in terms of history. Okay, but in terms of ethnic languages, I think they will take that into consideration because, after all, it is in the manifesto, and it has been talked about before this as well, and but not so much on history.
For ethnic languages, I would like to clarify that for Kadazan Dusun language, it is already being taught in schools since 1997. It's just that if the government decides to decentralize education and have more power in terms of administering or managing ethnic languages in the state level, then that means other ethnic languages such as the subjects, the languages that have not been in the education system will have the opportunity to be revived through the education system. So that means we will have teacher trainings and also funding, as well as the developing of the curriculum for those ethnic languages. So here, what I mean is, it won't only be Kadazan Dusun language, but it will also involve other ethnic languages that are actually endangered in the state.
Like I know in the states, like they do. Some states they say they'll ban certain books or they'll emphasize other books when it comes to literature and things that they'll make their students read and all that. And I guess they'll have an impact on how they perceive themselves. Like good piece of literature can really be world changing for some readers and people who really identify with it. So I was hoping maybe like an emphasis on local literature as well. Things are local, basically. Things are Sabahan. like organically Sabahan, because I think this is fear that if it's too like I mentioned earlier on, is that sometimes the state has to align with the interests of the nation, but I think that's sometimes I can see that being a very tired and tried excuse if it comes to pass. Like people would say, "Oh, well, you can't do that because we need to. We're still part of Malaysia, so we need to still toe the line as Malaysians and all that." But I think that is just an easy way to shut down any kind of representation, articulation of something that's Sabahan or something that's localized, saying that, "Oh, this is against the national principles or national identity and all that." But what is a Malaysian national identity really? We still haven't figured that out. So I think we should just have more time to experiment and see where do we want to be or where do we want to go. But I think that's all for me as well. Like I that's really like when we think of like changes in Malaysia, a lot of it tends to focus on like a very great realizing its potential. Basically, a lot of conversations when it comes to making changes in Malaysia is maximizing or bringing out the best that we can. So hence, it's going to be definitely have use some languages that's quite idealistic, but I don't think that's an issue really because you're going to need some lofty goals and ambitions if you want to take something that may be not working and make it replace with something that's better and see it all the way through.
So I guess that's the end of our conversation in terms of education and federalism. Yeah. So what you mentioned about earlier, I guess they are very insightful, and I've thought about a few things that I've never even thought about, like for example, the delivery system. Yes, delivery and how do you say this? An effective and efficient delivery is needed. That is one of the things that when it comes to decentralizing or decentralizing education, having a quality education, that is one of the things that we need to take into account. Yeah, that's one of the things that you mentioned that I think, oh yeah, we need to consider this one. So thank you for that. And so for this podcast, I guess that is all. I hope the listeners out there will find something insightful from this one. And also, please try to keep an open mind when listening to this podcast. Okay, so yeah, thank you so much for listening. I'm Cikgu Zell, signing off. And this is Adi. And would you like to say anything, Adi, before we end?
Well, all I can say, if you're a student listening, study hard, but not just like study what's in school, but broaden your horizons. There's more to learning than just in school. Learn what you can out of life as well.
Yeah, and if you are a teacher listening to this, I hope you will also consider our governance system in how they deliver quality or not quality education, Yeah, so that is all from us. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.